My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I spent 9 years studying something that wasn't supposed to exist. I submitted over 400 research papers during that time. Most of them were published. Some were rejected without explanation. The one that should have changed everything was marked as lost in a server migration that happened to occur exactly 2 weeks after I submitted it. I got my doctorate in behavioral ecology from UC Davis in 2008. My dissertation focused on apex predator hunting patterns in fragmented ecosystems. I was young, ambitious, and I believed that understanding animal behavior could save species from extinction. In 2012, I was working at a research institute in Sacramento when I received an unusual email. It came from someone named Dr. Marcus Chen at the Department of Interior's Regional Wildlife Assessment Division. He said they had a position available for a lead research biologist at what he called a specialized study site. The email was vague, but the salary was substantial. More than double what I was making. I called him. He said the position involved studying an apex predator in a region where traditional census methods had failed. He couldn't discuss specifics over the phone. He asked if I had a current security clearance. I didn't. He said that wasn't a problem yet, but it might become one. I should come to Portland for an interview. When I arrived at the office, I realized I'd never seen an official government building with so little signage. The elevator required a keycard that Dr. Chen provided. The 9th floor had 3 doors and no windows. He walked me past 2 locked doors into a conference room with a single table and no decorations on the walls. "What I'm about to tell you is classified," he said. "There's an ecosystem in the Ochoco National Forest that has experienced significant predation events. Livestock disappeared. Equipment was destroyed. Search and rescue operations yielded nothing. The last field team reported equipment failure and evacuated. We need someone who can work independently, document observations with precision, and maintain protocol." "What kind of animal are we discussing?" I asked. "That's the question we need answered," he said. "We have thermal imaging from 2008 that shows something moving through that region. We have track casts that don't match any known species. We have audio recordings from motion-triggered cameras that we haven't been able to classify. We need a behavioral biologist with your experience to establish what we're dealing with." He showed me a folder with 6 photographs. 4 were of partial track impressions in mud. 1 was a thermal image showing a bipedal form moving through dense forest. 1 was a close-up of what appeared to be fur caught on barbed wire, reddish-brown in color. "Is this real?" I asked. "That's why we need you," he said. I should have declined. Any reasonable scientist would have. Instead, I asked about the salary again and when I could start. The research station was built into the side of a ridge in a remote section of the forest. It took me 5 hours of driving and 40 minutes of hiking to reach it. The building was small, concrete, with a generator and a water tank. 1 researcher lived there full-time. A rotating staff of assistants came in for 2-week rotations. I would be the lead investigator for 9 months at a time. The permanent resident was a man named Robert Kerr, who had been there for 3 years. He was 46, quiet, and he had the kind of exhaustion that comes from isolation rather than overwork. He gave me a tour of the facility without making eye contact. "The equipment room is locked," he said. "You'll get a key. The solar panels need maintenance every 2 weeks. The water filter needs changing monthly. There's food in the pantry. We keep a 3-month surplus. What about the research materials?" I asked. "Satellite phone. There's no cell service within 30 miles. The phone is in my room. No personal calls except on Sunday. We keep the daily reports to 10 minutes or less. Dr. Chen doesn't like long transmissions. Why? I asked. Robert finally looked at me. Because sound carries in this forest. And we don't know if it's listening to transmissions. I thought he was making a joke. He wasn't. That first week, I established the baseline routine. We deployed 24 motion-triggered cameras around the station at predetermined intervals. We set up audio recording stations at higher elevations where Dr. Chen indicated previous activity had been logged. I reviewed 3 years of data from Robert's observations. The documentation was meticulous. Daily patrol logs, equipment maintenance records, weather observations, wildlife sightings, and a detailed timeline of significant events. The significant events began in 2015. A section of fence was destroyed. Not cut or pushed over. Broken. The wood was splintered downward, which Robert noted was consistent with something pushing through from the other side. The next event was the disappearance of a motion camera from a tree 30 feet high. The mounting bracket was still there. The camera was gone. Could an animal remove it? I asked. Not accidentally, Robert said. The bracket was stripped. Deliberately unbolted. Over the next 2 years, similar events recurred. Equipment disappeared. Cameras were destroyed in ways that suggested intentional destruction rather than accidental damage. In March 2017, a colleague named Dr. David Morrison arrived for a 2-week rotation. On his 3rd day, he reported that something had walked through the camp at night. He heard it. Heavy footsteps, bipedal pattern, moving between the buildings. Did you see it? I asked. No. It was dark. And I followed protocol. Which protocol? Rule number 7, he said. Don't leave the building if something is outside at night. I had read rule number 7 in the station manual. The exact wording was, in the event of nocturnal activity, all personnel remain indoors until dawn. Exterior lighting remains off. No investigation is conducted until visual confirmation is available. How many times has rule number 7 been invoked? I asked Robert later. He looked at his logs. 43 times in 3 years. And no one's ever seen anything during daylight investigation. Once, he said. A researcher named Patricia Okafor. In 2016. She reported large bipedal tracks near the stream, human-like in many respects, but the stride length was approximately 8 feet. The foot impression was 16 inches long. She took photographs and measurements. Dr. Chen had her write a full report. 2 weeks later, she was transferred. I was told it was due to her contract ending. Was her report included in the files you gave me? No, Robert said. Dr. Chen removed some files. He asks which observations were most significant, and if I mention something he considers too speculative, the original documentation disappears. I had been there for 3 weeks when my first rule number 7 incident occurred. It was November. I was reviewing camera footage in the office around 9 p.m. when Robert came in. Shut everything down, he said. I heard something. I powered down the computers and followed him. He was standing in the common area, listening. The sound came again. Footsteps on the wooden porch outside. Heavy, deliberate, 1 step every 2 seconds. The footsteps stopped at the northern corner of the building, then continued around to the eastern side. They stopped at the door to the equipment room. We waited. In the silence, I could hear my heart rate increase. Robert stood completely still, not moving. The footsteps resumed, moving toward the water tank. I heard what sounded like something large brushing against the metal exterior of the tank. A low, almost subsonic vibration that I felt in my chest rather than heard. Then silence. That's it, Robert whispered. It's gone. We remained indoors until 6 a.m. I documented the events in my notebook, noting the timestamp and duration. 23 minutes of activity. No visual confirmation. No photographs. No investigation possible under rule number 7. The next morning, I examined the exterior of the building. There were no tracks in the soft ground near the porch. The water tank showed no visible damage. The door to the equipment room was locked, undisturbed. Whatever had been outside had left no evidence that daylight could confirm. This became my reality for 9 years. I documented everything. I created a database of incidents organized by date, type, duration, and location relative to the station. I analyzed thermal imaging footage and worked to establish baseline temperature patterns for the region. I categorized audio recordings and attempted spectral analysis to determine frequency ranges. I set up motion sensors that would trigger lights and sound, hoping to startle whatever was out there into revealing itself. Nothing worked. The creatures, I began to assume there was more than one, adapted to every method I implemented. I deployed thermal cameras. After 6 months, they stopped working in a pattern that suggested someone or something had learned their locations and disabled them. I set up acoustic monitoring that recorded ultrasonic frequencies.
God,
The recordings captured unusual sounds in the 15 to 25 kilohertz range that didn't match any known wildlife. When I submitted the audio files to Dr. Chen for analysis, he told me the files were inconclusive and asked me to focus on more conventional documentation. I established a perimeter grid with GPS waypoints and conducted systematic surveys. The surveys revealed unusual patterns in animal distribution. Deer avoided certain areas entirely. Ravens abandoned established roosting sites and relocated 15 miles north. Smaller predators, coyotes, foxes, showed signs of behavioral stress, marking excessively and traveling in larger groups than typical. Something was affecting the entire ecosystem. And after 4 years of study, I realized I had documented almost nothing concrete. In 2019, I requested a meeting with Dr. Chen. He came to the station for 2 days. I presented my findings. I showed him thermal anomalies, behavioral changes in prey species, the pattern of equipment destruction, the chronology of incidents. I proposed that we might be dealing with an unclassified large primate, possibly a relict population of something thought extinct. That's excellent work, Dr. Chen said. This is exactly what we need. Then let's publish something, I said. We have enough data to at least argue for further investigation through normal scientific channels. No, he said simply. Why not? This is significant. If there's an unknown apex predator in this forest. Dr. Vasquez, you were hired to conduct research, not to determine what we do with the research. You'll continue documenting. You'll continue following protocol. And you'll continue sending your reports to me. What about the research I've already completed? The papers I've written? Which papers? He asked. I listed 4 submissions, including the one on acoustic analysis of the high-frequency sounds. None of those have been published, he said. 3 were rejected by peer review. 1 is still in review. That wasn't accurate, and we both knew it. I had received rejection emails from journals, but I had also submitted 1 paper to a peer-reviewed cryptozoology journal that had indicated acceptance pending final revisions. I asked Dr. Chen about it. It's still in review, he said. The process is slower than you'd expect. I checked my email after he left. The acceptance letter was gone. The entire email chain with the journal was gone. I had backup copies on my personal laptop, but the files had been corrupted. Only the laptop I used at the station, which was remotely monitored, remained intact. That's when I understood what rule number 7 really meant. It wasn't about safety. It was about keeping something hidden. And I wasn't documenting the creature. I was part of a system that was containing it, or perhaps, studying it through observation. The question I began to ask myself was whether I was studying the predator or if it was studying me. The incidents intensified after 2020. They became more personal. In January 2021, I found a symbol carved into the wooden frame of the eastern window. It was a series of curved lines arranged in a pattern that might have been abstract or might have been intentional. I photographed it and reported it to Dr. Chen. He said to sand it down and paint over it. When I checked the window the next morning, someone had already done exactly that. But I had made a photocopy of my photograph, and I compared it to other documentation I had found in Robert's archived logs. The same symbol appeared in 5 different locations over the 3-year period. Always carved into wood. Always in locations accessible to something moving outside the station. Each location was documented and each time, Dr. Chen had ordered the marks removed. I began to research the symbol independently. I sent encrypted messages to colleagues I trusted, describing the pattern without context. Most didn't recognize it. One colleague, Dr. Sarah Unger at Berkeley, responded that it resembled a marking system she'd encountered in historical texts about Native American territorial indicators. Specifically from Chinookan cultures. She said some anthropologists had theorized that certain patterns were meant as warnings or boundary markers, but the academic community largely dismissed such interpretations as speculative. I asked if she knew anything about the Ochoco region specifically. She didn't, but she offered to connect me with someone who did, a Umatilla tribal member named James Redhawk who worked in cultural resource management. When I called James, he was cautious. I told him I was conducting research in the Ochoco and had found markings I was trying to identify. He asked what the markings looked like. I described them carefully. There was a long silence. That marking means, do not go deeper, he said finally. My grandmother told me stories about marks like that. They were territorial indicators. Something lived deeper in the mountains, and our people had an agreement about where we could and couldn't go. What kind of something? I asked. The stories were never clear. But they were old. Older than anything recorded in writing. And whatever it was, our people respected the boundaries. I thanked him and ended the call, but his words stayed with me. For the next 6 months, I studied everything I could find about Native American territorial practices in that region. The documentation was sparse, and most of it was second-hand accounts recorded by anthropologists decades after the original oral histories had been shared. But there were consistent themes. Something lived in the high Ochoco range. People didn't go there. There were rules. There were consequences for breaking those rules. Then, in July 2022, something changed. I was conducting a survey about 3 miles northeast of the station when I found the remains. They were partially buried under a dense pile of branches and leaves, arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. Bones, scattered but organized. I documented the location and approached carefully. The remains were from a large animal, possibly an elk. But the arrangement suggested intentional placement, not a natural death site. When I reported it to Dr. Chen, he was quiet for several minutes before responding. Don't return to that location, he said. Mark it on your map as off-limits. New protocol, you do not investigate any sites that show evidence of intentional arrangement or preparation. What does that mean? I asked. This could be significant. It means you don't investigate them. Mark the location. Move on. Do you understand? No. I don't understand. We're here to document animal behavior. No, Dr. Chen said, and I heard something different in his voice. Not anger. Fear. You're here to observe from a distance. You're here to maintain protocol. And you're here to remember that rule number 7 extends to daytime activity when necessary. Do you understand? I understood. He was telling me that there were situations where I shouldn't investigate during the day either. He was telling me that my role was to look but not to see, to document but not to understand, to be present but not to interfere. The next incident came in September 2022. Robert was rotating out, and a new assistant named Thomas Crane was arriving. Robert and I were waiting for Thomas on the porch when we heard something. A sound, unlike anything I had documented in 9 years. It was high-pitched, sustained, almost musical. It lasted for nearly 40 seconds and seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously. What was that? Thomas asked. He had arrived early, and Robert was showing him around. Wildlife, Robert said flatly. Document it and move on. But Thomas didn't look convinced. And he kept looking into the dark forest around us, trying to locate the source of the sound. That night, I found him outside his room around 2 a.m., looking out the window. His face was pale. Did you hear it again? I asked. He nodded. It's learning, he said. It's mimicking sounds. That noise we heard earlier, it had structure. It had patterns. It was like it was trying to form words. That's not possible, I said, but I didn't believe it. Neither is anything else about this place, he said. But it's still happening. Thomas left the rotation after 4 days. He claimed personal illness. Dr. Chen didn't send a replacement. For the first time, Robert and I were alone at the station. And for the first time, Robert spoke candidly about what he believed was happening. It's not from here, he said. It doesn't behave like any animal I know. It learns. It remembers. It makes decisions. And I think it knows what we're doing. How? I asked. Because it stopped avoiding us. Because it leaves things for us to find. Because it plays with the equipment. Because it mimics sounds. Because it came here deliberately, and now it's staying deliberately. And because, Dr. Vasquez, I've started to think that we're not here to study it. We're here to keep it company. I requested a meeting with Dr. Chen immediately. I told him I had serious concerns about continued safety, about the escalating behavior, about Thomas's departure. I insisted that we needed to escalate this to wildlife authorities or the Forest Service. No, Dr. Chen said. You're following protocol. Protocol is clearly insufficient. Protocol is all we have, he said, and I heard that same fear in his voice. Do you know how long this has been happening, Dr. Vasquez? Do you know how many researchers have been posted to that station? Do you know how long people have known something was in those mountains? Tell me, I said. No, he said. Because you don't need to know. You need to continue observing. You need to continue documenting. And you need to ensure that whatever is happening in that forest remains contained. Contained. Not studied. Contained. I continued for another year after that conversation. But everything changed. I started noticing details I had previously overlooked. The pattern of incidents correlated with my own actions. When I deployed cameras, the creature responded. When I created surveys, it avoided those areas in new ways. When I attempted acoustic monitoring, it produced sounds and frequencies I had learned to expect. It was learning my methodology. And it was adjusting accordingly. In November 2023, I made my decision. I wrote a comprehensive report documenting everything. Not just the incidents and the data, but my interpretation. My conclusion was that we were dealing with an intelligent, adaptive organism that demonstrated behavioral complexity typically associated with primates or cetaceans. I submitted the report to Dr. Chen with a request for sabbatical. He approved the sabbatical immediately. Too immediately. As if he had been waiting for me to reach some threshold of exposure or understanding. Before I left the station, I prepared a complete set of digital files and physical backups of everything I had documented. I planned to store them in multiple locations and reach out to trusted colleagues about publishing the work independently. I left the station on December 2, 2023. On December 4th, my university office was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but every physical file related to the Ochoco project was gone. My external hard drives were missing. The backup I had stored at a colleague's house was also missing. My colleague reported that her office had been burglarized the same night, and only that particular external drive was taken. I returned to my apartment and found it had been searched. Carefully. Professionally, in a way that made clear someone knew I would notice but wanted me to understand they had access to everything. The files on my personal laptop are still there. The ones I encrypted before leaving the station. I've never decrypted them. I haven't returned to the Ochoco since I left. But I received a package 6 months ago. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was taken from inside my bedroom at the station. The perspective suggests it was taken from approximately where my bed was positioned. The image shows the interior of my room, taken at night with infrared capability. And in the corner of the image, barely visible, is a reflection in the mirror above my dresser. Something was standing in my room while I slept. I don't know how many times this occurred. I don't know how long it was happening before the photograph was sent. I don't know if it was documentation or a message or a threat. I still work in wildlife research. I took a position at a university far from the Pacific Northwest. But I've stopped publishing. I've stopped submitting papers. And I check my locks every night before I go to bed. I also started noticing something else, about 3 months ago. I'll be working in my office, completely alone, and I'll hear something. It's always at the edge of perception. A sound that could be the wind or the building settling or nothing at all. But it sounds like heavy breathing, and it sounds like it's coming from just outside my window. I haven't looked. I've learned not to look. And I've learned that some things, once you've studied them, they don't stop studying you in return. Dr. Chen's office no longer exists. The Department of Interior has no record of a regional wildlife assessment division. And Robert Kerr, the permanent resident at that station, disappeared in 2024. The official statement is that he retired. I have reason to believe something else happened, but I've also learned the cost of pressing for information I'm not supposed to have. I don't know what was in that forest. I still don't know if it was a single creature or multiple individuals. I don't know if it was territorial or curious or something in between. I don't know if the government knew what it was all along or if they were as confused as I was. And I don't know why, after all this time, I sometimes feel like something is still very close to me. Closer than it should be. Waiting for me to understand something that I'm still not capable of comprehending. The only thing I know with certainty is this: I spent 9 years studying something in the forest. But the real question, the one that wakes me at night, is when exactly it started studying me in return.